Hello, Anabology. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Good. Yeah, nice to meet you. Nice to be here.
I'm sure it's going to be a great discussion. Let's start directly for our listeners who don't know what the honey diet is, maybe who you are. Maybe just give us a brief intro.
Yeah, yeah, I go by Anabology on Twitter. I'm still anonymous overall there, and I kind of had a decent rise on Twitter mostly because of this diet that I came up with and tested on myself, and it worked pretty well, called the honey diet. And the honey diet is essentially a diet where I was eating a pound of honey a day. I was eating a half pound of dates, and then for dinner I was eating kind of a pound of beef and a pound of vegetables. So I was eating just foods in pound quantities, but the majority of my calories were coming from pure sugar. And I started eating more calories than before I went on this diet, and I lost about 10 pounds over a month and a half. And my blood work ended up being fine afterwards. Didn't really have any raise like hemoglobin A1C or like fasting insulin or anything. So it seemed to work. And the way I came to the diet originally was that I started seeing these kind of mouse and rat studies where these animals were fed instead of water, Coca-Cola. And these animals, they would track the amount of Coca-Cola and calories that they would overall eat because the chow that they would eat could be weighed or it would be controlled. And the water could be measured that they drank, or the Coca-Cola that they measured, or that they drank could be measured. Sorry. And they found that the animals that were drinking the Coca-Cola instead of water somehow were able to eat like 4 times the calories of the other mice, yet not gain any weight. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, how are they eating so many calories and just not grossly obese? And the authors of the study, they weren't, like paid off by the soda industry or anything, because their conclusions from these studies was that they found that the animals that drank the high amounts of Coca-Cola had slightly worse triglyceride levels. So they were like, this alters tissue lipids and blood lipids of the rats, and makes them unhealthy. But they just kind of just like glossed over the fact that they were eating 4 times the calories and not gaining any weight. So I looked at these and I tried to dig into like the mechanisms and like why this worked further. And I around the same time I found these diet studies by the Lemming Lab where they reduced isoleucine to nearly nothing in the diet, which is one amino acid that's like an essential amino acid in protein. And they found that these animals that had isoleucine restriction lived like 30% longer than animals that had just a normal protein diet. And they also had a faster metabolism. So they ate more calories and they weighed less. And I dug more into the like mechanism behind this, where they found that this most likely works through this factor called FGF21. So
Mhm.
if you restrict protein, or specifically isoleucine, this factor called FGF21 gets released from the liver, and it's kind of like a hormone, because it acts at a long distance. So it's this hormone that increases the metabolic rate when protein is restricted. But it's also known that if you add more calories to somebody's diet, so like you add sugar or you add fat in this protein restricted setting, that FGF21 is induced even stronger, right? So then I saw like all of this data together and I was like, wow, okay, so basically what this is saying is that if I restrict protein and I eat a lot of sugar, then this hormone FGF21 gets induced, and then maybe my metabolism will go faster and I'll live longer, which is like a pretty crazy conclusion from all of that. So I was like, okay, well, what is like the least toxic sugar source that I could try, right? Because there's high fructose corn syrup, which, has all these different processing steps that induce unknowns. There's sucrose, and who knows, like if you need some other kind of natural stuff in there. But I knew that the Hadza ate a ton of honey, right? Like the tribe of people, and they naturally ate all this honey, and they tend to have like pretty good outcomes in terms of lifespan uh once they get past infant mortality rates and everything. So then I was like, okay, so honey is probably like the thing I should try, because it's basically pure sugar. Like the majority of the weight in honey is just sugar. It's pretty low in protein, pretty low in any other macro or nutrient. But it's like not gonna give me some toxic thing that is added from the processing steps there if I ate raw honey. So yeah, I just decided to eat like basically 1,000 calories or 1,500 calories more from honey, in this protein restricted setting in the first part of my day, and then just put all my protein into dinner. So after I kind of like burn through all the sugar, then just have my protein for the day at that point and kind of reset myself overnight. And then see if I get these, metabolic rate increases that these animals were seeing, but just in the first part of the day, so I could still eat kind of like a sane diet and not be completely starved of protein. And it worked. Yeah, it worked pretty well. I lost a bunch of weight. I had basically some of the least migraines of my life when before I had chronic migraines. And yeah, it was like a pretty remarkable experience, I think.
Congrats, congrats. Or why is this diet good? So is it
Mhm.
protein restriction? Is it the increase in metabolism? Is it something else? Or where would you just highlight the benefit of this?
Yeah, well, so it seems like there's two questions there. There's like why does it work the way it does, and then like why should somebody do it? I guess like the reason why I think it works the way it does is so you can do protein restriction and eat a bunch of like carbohydrate or starch or stearic acid, so kind of like beef tallow.
Hmm.
And it does induce FGF21. It does induce this like hormonal mediator that increases the metabolic rate. But I think in those cases, there doesn't seem to be as strong of a weight loss effect. So the reason why I think this works isn't just like merely protein restriction or the like induction of FGF21. I think it's this imbalance between the amount of calories that the liver sees and the amount of calories that the rest of the body sees. So specifically fructose and MCT oil, if you're on the fat side, they target the liver more directly than the rest of the body. Like they go, right through the portal vein in the case of like fructose or MCT, I believe, right to like the liver, and then the liver sees a lot of calories, and then it has to kind of export the calories to the rest of the body if it wants to like offload them. Whereas some other fats can kind of go directly into like chylomicrons or glucose more readily goes into the blood and then is dependent on insulin. So specifically like the fructose and the MCTs target the liver first, and then this liver, which is the thing that produces the hormone, mainly, sees all of these calories, and it's like, oh my God, you must have eaten like 6,000 calories right now when you only ate maybe 1,000. So then it induces like a hormone much more strongly to increase the metabolic rate of the whole body, thinking that there's more calories everywhere, but there's like not, right? So that's why I think it leads to weight loss. But that would specifically be with like fructose and MCT, and you could do protein restriction and not lose weight if you did think diets that didn't have these kind of like liver targeting macros.
I'm kind of the guy who says that we should not do any calorie restriction, or
Mhm.
maybe we do fasting but not reduce our calories. And because this, I mean, lowering effect of your thyroid, etc., etc., at the end maybe acts as an inhibition to losing weight. And I've heard you in other podcasts saying that now you're eating more than 3,000 calories per day, right? So is there a specific benefit at the end in raising your metabolic rate to that level? Maybe it's more energy, maybe it's faster healing. Just say here that we also said that mice that have higher FGF21 levels actually live longer. But that's a bit contradictory because usually we associate living longer with a slower metabolism, right? So with more fasting or calorie restriction and so forth. So again, maybe two questions, but
Mhm.
how do you approach the whole metabolism or metabolic rate topic?
Yeah. Well, I want to start with the second kind of question about like the metabolism being associated with like a longer or shorter life, depending on how
Mhm.
fast it is. First, so I think this is like less subtle than people think, because the generally like the reason why this is like such a pervasive idea that like if you have a fast metabolism, you're going to live a shorter lifespan. It's like mostly the interspecies comparisons where you look at the animals that have like a fast metabolism, which are small animals like mice, and then you compare that to an animal that has like a slower metabolism, like humans or an elephant, and then they live much longer.
Mhm.
But like physically, like this has to happen as you scale the animal to being larger. Because if like an elephant had the metabolism of a mice, it would just overheat to the degree where it just explodes, basically, or like melts. because it just can't exchange heat fast enough with like such a high volume uh, to like surface area ratio. So like that, like if you just say that like big animals live longer, that would be just as accurate as saying that animals with a slower metabolism live longer, and maybe like that's the explanatory factor rather than just like the metabolic rate. And then there are some like really big outliers to this. So like one outlier on the fast metabolism side is a bat. Like bats live, quite a long time, yet they have a very, very fast metabolism and they run really hot. And then naked mole rats also live a very long time, but they have a super, super slow metabolism, like even slower than the trend. And these are like animals are kind of around the same size, like a bat and a naked mole rat. And I think it seems like they have like slightly different strategies of how they like approach longevity biologically, where like bats, they have like these really, really strong immune systems where they'll just kind of like get rid of any cells that are going to be like cancer, any cells that are going to be like infected really, really fast. And it might be like related to their metabolic rate. It also might be like related to how social they are because they're around like so many other bats. And then the naked mole rats, they kind of just like allow damage to happen to them and somehow tolerate just really high levels of damage. So these naked mole rats with a really slow metabolic rate, they actually have higher levels of DNA damage. They have, really weak immune systems, but they live like a really long time. But probably because they just, you know, like usually in a human, if you have like all of this damage in you, the way that you die from it is kind of like an immune reaction to the damage. So we're maybe more on like this bat side where like maybe we actually want like this stronger immune system and to be like a little bit hotter. Like it depends. I guess the question is like really, are we more like bats or are we more like naked mole rats in my head? And then John Speakman, who's done like a lot of these kind of diet studies um, and kind of studies about metabolic rate and body temperature and everything. They did a study where they kind of forced these mice to be in like a hotter or colder environment. And then they basically took some mice that were like in a hot environment and they put constant ventilation over them. So the idea here was that if you put constant ventilation over a mouse, like in a hot environment, and then you do another group that doesn't have the ventilation, the mice that are in the high temperature environment with no ventilation will slow down their metabolism and then adapt their body temperature to kind of like match their environment. And then the ones with the ventilation, they have this constant heat exchange, so then their metabolism can stay fast, but they've raised their body temperature to like kind of match this environment. So it's like a little convoluted study. But I think what they found is that like at least in this like weird kind of setup, they think that the higher body temperatures are actually slightly worse for lifespan in mice, and then the faster metabolisms in mice are better, right? So they tried to decouple metabolism from body temperature, and they were like within a group of like a lower or hotter body temperature, the ones with the faster metabolisms that like ate more and weighed less lived longer, but then the ones with the higher body temperatures didn't live as long. Uh, so it's I recommend like trying to find that study. It was like by John
Yeah, that
Speakman.
would be
If
great
you're
because sounds quite interesting. But
yeah.
so you're at the end, though, with all the discussion we had so far, I
Uh-huh.
think you are pro-metabolic guy, right? So you,
Yeah.
you prefer a high metabolism. And
Mhm.
because for me, I also see that once you have lower metabolism. So I see it also with people I work on. Besides the per se energy, they also start having problems, for example, constipation, or
Mhm.
they have maybe rashes. And I think here, independent of the diet, maybe eating enough or having enough energy available to run all your metabolic processes that you need are actually essential. And maybe the fact that people think that they can be or they can live longer with a lower metabolic rate, maybe that can be achieved, but then at the expense of a lower quality life potentially.
Right. Yeah, and one of my like general ideas that I think is uh like I want to push more onto society in general is that most interventions that I've seen that actually seem like raise lifespan seem to make people feel better. I think that like one of the things that comes out of kind of just like the lack of translatability between like yeast to worms to flies to mice to humans, right? Like the path of like more expensive lifespan studies is that like there will be these interventions that maybe like make a mouse live longer, and then it makes a human feel bad. So then people are like immediately, oh, well, this is like, feeling bad. Like I associate that with living longer. Like I need to be cold, I need to be hibernating away from the sun. But then you look at the epidemiology in humans, you look at do people who are in the sunlight live longer? And the answer is yes, they do. They do live like much longer. They have like lower rates of nearly all cancers, except maybe squamous cell carcinoma, if people get like a lot of sunlight exposure. And one of the most successful like lifespan extending drugs that exists that has been translated from mice to dogs and then even humans, and seems to like it could work even better in humans is this drug called L-deprenyl. It's called selegiline, which is an anti-Parkinson's drug that raises dopamine in the brain and it prevents neurodegeneration. And this is something that just like makes people feel great, right? It's like pro dopamine. You just feel like it's like take a weak shot of Adderall like all the time. But it makes basically every animal try and like live longer. So it's like I think that the idea that you have to kind of feel bad to live longer is incorrect. And I think like having a faster metabolism generally makes people feel better. So that's like, I don't think it's really been studied in humans like whether or not like a high body temperature or faster metabolism makes somebody live longer or shorter, but it's definitely known that if you are hypothyroid or super hyperthyroid, you live like a shorter amount of time. Like there's like a U-shape association. There's like an optimal place for
Yeah.
at least thyroid status. But thyroid isn't the only way to have like a fast metabolism, right? Like you can have, it's one component. But having being very hyperthyroid comes with its like own set of side effects, and you may be able to get to that level of metabolic rate without having too much thyroid in your blood, for example.
Yeah, sure,
So
sure. How important is digestion for the success of the diet itself? So
yeah, I
it's
think
also
yeah.
because it's honey per se, right? So it's simple sugar, so it should be potentially easier to digest than starches, for example. I mean, how important is, in your opinion, digestion?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So I think that one thing that can make people they like can follow the diet to the T but still fail is certain fruits like mangoes. They can really cause like constipation and just like slow down the digestive system by quite a lot. And
Mhm.
some people you'll see people, eat like a ton of mangoes, leave them like super bloated. But the macros in mangoes are perfect. So like it's kind of mostly sugar, like a little bit of tiny bit of protein, but not very much. But I think what ruins mangoes is that it's just, you know, it just stays in the gut for too long.
Yeah,
And then you get the second order effects of maybe like bacteria growing because it's just like stuck in the gut. You're not passing like bowel movements. So, and when people do this diet and also do fruitarian diets, which I think is like the best kind of vegan diet. I think most vegan diets don't work, but I think fruitarian like almost works. The people have like 4 or 5 bowel movements a day. Like they have like a lot, right?
yeah.
And maybe over time it gets to like a little bit less, like two bowel movements. But that's, it seems like fairly optimal. I think people who have less frequent bowel movements generally weigh more.
Right. So
Mhm.
you said specifically that if someone even doing one meal a day might be able to put, or might be able, might put kilos on, because it's not about only what uh, the calories in, but where these calories go. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I'm pretty curious as to what you meant.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that so calories in, calories out is true in that like in the thermodynamic sense. But it's just so like the thing that people use calories in, calories out to kind of argue is that the only way that you can lose weight is by restricting calories because or by working out a lot. And they assume that the only way that you can alter calories out is doing cardio, and then the only way that you can alter calories in is by changing the amount that you eat.
Hmm.
Um, like willfully, essentially. But I think that my like argument here with calories in, calories out is that for one, like your calories out is very flexible and it depends on the like macro ratios and the kind of diet that you eat. So somebody on like a one meal a day diet where they eat, say, maybe 1,700 calories in the meal. If they eat just like the worst possible macro ratio that makes animals obese really reliably, which I would argue is kind of like maybe sugar plus seed oils plus like some starch plus a lot of protein, like something like
Mhm.
that would be kind of like the worst case scenario. They would probably eat like 1,700 calories in a day as like an adult male and gain weight. But then I think that the same person could do like many meals over the entire day, eat like 3,500 calories, but just of like the correct macros. Say they do a really extreme keto diet with low protein, kind of like the X fat loss version, or they do like a honey diet, and then they could lose weight, right? So calories in and calories out is true because the calories out increases when you make the diet like a really high quality diet. But but it's just like not a useful framework to make an argument about what you should do in terms of eating, I think.
Is it your opinion that maybe at the end we need to eat close to our metabolic rate? Meaning that, yeah, where we have the calorie out part, obviously we want to influence by eating a good diet, but at the end, if your metabolic rate is a bit messed up, right, then you at the end you cannot eat 3,000 calories if you can only tolerate at some point in time 2,000, right? So you need to build up to it
Mhm.
slowly, right? And that's, I guess, what you did. So I'm not sure how long it take you to build up eating 3,000 calories per day.
Well, for me, it was pretty immediate where I just like immediately started well, okay, so before the diet, I like gained a bunch of weight because I was basically just eating ice cream every day. I wanted to see if ice cream would cause weight loss because some people claim that ice cream is good for you. And no, I definitely got fat. So I was eating a lot of calories before, and then with this diet, maybe I was eating like but before I was eating for at least a few weeks without losing weight, kind of just the maybe 2,000, 2,500 calories just from beef and like a little bit of fruits, but spread throughout the day. And I wasn't losing any weight. And then I got onto the diet and I just raised the calorie intake by like 1,000 in like a day. And I started losing weight pretty quickly. But the data that exists, at least on this, about like how fast it takes for the metabolism to change, and you did share like a paper with me on this kind of
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
where people were overfed carbohydrates and their amount of carbohydrates that they were oxidizing, that they were metabolizing, raised over about a week. And I've seen similar things. Like when you start overeating or you eat more calories than before, especially with carbohydrates, your metabolism starts to ramp up, but it takes quite a while. It takes like a week, a couple weeks to start to
So that's
get up to
reasonable,
like
I guess.
significant level, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it is possible that, and I would recommend if you think your metabolism is like super compromised, then don't just go and eat 6,000 calories in a day. But I would eat like a little bit more than what you assume your metabolic rate is with like a kind of more separated macro diet, right? So like the keto version of this would actually be from waking to like 3 p.m., you would eat basically only MCT oil, maybe a little bit of coconut oil, maybe a little bit of cream, but like just mainly the MCTs. And maybe like you could make a MCT mayo with like lettuce or something, right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
just like egg yolk MCT. And then you would eat like all of that. And then for dinner, you would eat kind of like a normal high protein dinner. And throughout the day, you would have no protein at all. And then you would eat in this diet maybe a couple hundred calories more than what you were eating before. And then your metabolism might be able to increase if it works with fat, right? It's kind of unknown if it works with fat or not yet.
I had
But
promised Brad Marshall that I would try it, but I never tried it. So maybe it's time that I do. On the honey diet. So do you consider it a hack? So is it something that works only short term, or you think you'll keep it for, ever, I
yeah,
guess?
so I mean the main thing, going back to like just the benefits of it, the main thing that I like about it these days is that it kind of gives me the fasting like mental energy, but from waking until all the way till dinner, really. Where if I just fast, I'll have like this, period in the morning where I feel very mentally clear, and then over time I kind of just get hungry and tired. But this, it seems like I'm able to keep up that mental energy all day. And then the second I eat protein, that goes away. So I kind of try to default to this diet most days. And when I started it, it was about a year and a half ago now, like for the first time. And I've been eating kind of on and off like this for a year and a half, and I haven't really noticed any negative effects from it. So I think it's something that's like fairly sustainable, and it's a little bit, you can definitely go back and forth between a mixed macro diet and this diet because there's no water weight loss or gain period, right? Like you
Mm.
maintain the water weight on the diet. So if you want to do it kind of like on the weekdays or whenever it's convenient, and then maybe on the weekends go back to like the mixed macro diet, like that's totally something that is doable as well. Um, no, but I mean, it is like doing, if you just do the strict diet where it's like a pound of honey a day and like not even fruits or like very low fruits to keep like the protein super, super low, then that's a pretty extreme diet and not very sustainable, like psychologically, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But but people like eating fruits till noon, that's like a less extreme version of the diet. That's something that like a lot of people can do and don't have a bad time doing, I think.
A lot of people are doing it at the moment and they're really
Mm.
hyped about it and how easy it is, etc. So I think you've done a very good job about it. Is fructose itself an issue? My opinion of fructose up until this point is that okay, as long as you don't consume huge amount of fructose, then actually the liver, and in this case maybe that's a difference, but the liver will not see too much of it because it also, until it reaches the liver, it transforms as well. And if you have a also a more stable or a ratio of glucose to fructose of one to one, then actually it's even beneficial and helpful, right? And there are a lot of studies that show that fructose itself is bad, but that's in a setting, a clinical setting where they only, infuse the mice or whatsoever, only fructose. So let's disregard that.
So I think there was a study in healthy young men where they added, and it was in the past few years, I forget the name of the study, but they added a few hundred grams of fructose to their diet and they didn't gain any weight. They were kind of like healthy afterwards. And the only difference that they saw was that the triglycerides raised and there was also like a little bit of elevated like tissue triglycerides or like tissue fat essentially in the liver. So like my perspective on fructose generally is that in the context of protein, it can be bad, right? So if you have a lot of fructose with a lot of protein, then the fructose kind of just rails like the liver, and then the liver, because it can't express this FGF21 signal when there's a lot of protein, doesn't increase the metabolic rate enough. And then the fructose just gets used for de novo lipogenesis. It just gets turned into fat, and then there's also the reesterification of fat of the rest of the dietary fat, where if you ate seed oils, for example, at the same time, those seed oils will be deposited into the liver and tissues,
Yeah.
and then can cause oxidative stress. But that's like, it's kind of all the same program. Like once you turn on the de novo lipogenesis, you also turn on the reesterification of dietary fats, meaning that you put on the fats that you ate. So I think like in the context of fat and protein, especially these fats that are more unstable, it can be a lot worse. But I think in the context of like this honey diet where there's like basically no protein, the hormonal response is strong enough to metabolize nearly all of the fructose. And my triglycerides did rise from I think before it was like 65 or 70, maybe up to like 85 or 90. So it did raise like 20 milligrams per deciliter, I believe it was. If I'm maybe it's not the right quantity, I forget what it was.
If that's the case, then still pretty low, right? So it didn't rise
Yeah,
to
right.
130 or whatsoever. Okay.
Right. Right. And I think like the if you look at all-cause mortality for triglycerides in healthy people, around 100 is actually the minimum. Like there's somewhat of a U shape association where if your triglycerides are too low or too high, then you have worse outcomes. Um, so yeah, so like I think you can like test this. Like if you take fructose, I think that there's two markers that you should look for. Like one, you don't want triglycerides that get insanely high. Otherwise, your liver is just like not able to process them for some reason. Or
Mhm.
probably three markers, right? Because there's one case in which you eat fructose, your liver just tries to export all of it because it's not metabolizing it, and then you see that as these like triglycerides after de novo lipogenesis happens. Another thing is like maybe your export of the triglycerides is dysfunctional and you just deposit all the fat into your liver itself. And then you would look at your liver enzymes and try to not have elevated liver enzymes.
Yeah.
And then a third thing you can look at is, I believe it's fructosamine, which is like not a standard blood test, but it's kind of like the hemoglobin A1C version of fructose, where hemoglobin A1C is over time, if you have a high average blood glucose, your hemoglobin gets glycated. It reacts
Yeah.
with the glucose and gets glycated. But that same thing can happen with fructose, and you can measure that. So if your blood fructose is too high over time, then you can see that. And then also uric acid. And I tested all these things, tested the uric acid, tested fructosamine, and all of those were pretty like nominal levels. They didn't really raise too much on this diet.
I mean, I usually use uric acid as the marker plus liver enzymes, but yeah, uh, that's uh, that's interesting. And of course, the big you know no is blood sugar spikes, right? And I mean, maybe you can give us a bit more information because I know you have worn a CGM
Mhm.
because and me as well, me thinking about it, right? If you were saying, okay, 9 o'clock you start eating and up until 3, that gives us a pretty big window. Is your blood sugar constantly, I don't know, 140, let's say 150, or just, okay, you eat a couple of times, the amount you mentioned, dates plus honey, so it goes up and comes down after a couple of hours. Overall, paint us a bit of a picture of the blood glucose
Yeah.
curves, and if it's a problem for you, because for many, obviously, they want to see their blood glucose all day straight line below 100.
The actual like shape of the curve, basically, whenever I would eat even like a pound of honey, it never really got above like 160, 170 at the highest of the spike. Dates were actually a little bit worse for the blood glucose spikes than honey for some reason, where like honey usually get up to like 140, 150, even after eating like half a pound of honey in one sitting.
Okay,
Um, but the dates, if I ate the half pound of dates, it would get up to maybe like 170. Um,
okay,
but then it would come down really, really fast, right? It would within like an hour even, it would go down back to like 100 or 90. And then it would, I think as digestion kind of, I think that there's multiple like rate limiting steps before it goes into blood. So like one would be that you know, you have glucose coming in like through, at least half of the honey is glucose coming through your gut, and that can just like be stopped. Like the glucose transporters can be somewhat inhibited, I believe.
mhm,
And then the glucose goes into your blood, and then the cells can either accept the glucose, like be insulin sensitive transiently, or they can reject the glucose and be resistant to the insulin. And then there's also the varying levels of insulin. So it seems like over time, when I would digest more honey, and then the blood sugar after drop down back to like 90 would go up again to like 120, and then kind of go back down. It would go up and down
okay,
and up and
yeah,
down. But after eating once and then not eating for a while. But um, but I think the key like metric that I was looking for originally was just what is like the average glucose over the entire day and night, right? Because there's a lot of kind of robust data on healthy populations who eat like a completely normal diet, like not even a high sugar diet, and on what the healthy levels of like average blood glucose is. And that corresponds to like a hemoglobin A1C. So I was looking to see if it would stay within 95 to 105, because that seems to be the range that everyone shoots for. And it was about like 102, I believe, was the average glucose over the entire day and night, even
okay.
eating like 2,000 calories of honey and dates. And the hemoglobin A1C that I got by the end of the diet was 5.1. And it was like a range, like I've taken it multiple times throughout the entire diet. It was like 5.1, 5.3. The test might be just like a little bit imprecise. That's also consistent with like non-diabetic overall average glucose of around the 100 to 100 and kind of two during the day.
And
So I think like when it comes to blood sugar, I think the two things that people are worried about when there's like really big blood sugar spikes, and you can correct me if there's more. But the one thing is glycation, right? So people are worried about these like proteins that are almost permanent in your blood vessels are going to be glycated, and then for the rest of your life they're going to be stiffer or worse, or like things are going to build up on them. Um, but hemoglobin A1C is a good metric for that, right? Because it's like a direct measure of glycation.
mhm.
So if hemoglobin A1C is fine, then you don't have to worry too much about glycation. And then the other thing is insulin resistance that people worry about over time, having too much blood sugar. It's like the carbohydrate insulin model, where if you have too much insulin exposure, cells just become insulin resistant. And I just didn't find that on the diet. And it could be potentially, if even if the carbohydrate insulin model is correct, I think the fructose bypasses insulin. So you actually don't have as much insulin on this diet as you would on a really high protein, high starch diet.
But then the insulin model also does not, how I read it, it doesn't dictate I mean, what happens during the meals, but more how fast it comes down to baseline, right? So
Mhm.
if you do, I don't know, reach uh, high levels of insulin, which you do want with your meals, then it comes down right back, following maybe the curve of glucose as well, right? So, but then what was your fasting insulin? So was it in is it
Mhm.
low, or I mean, I know Paul Saladino doing his
Mhm.
animal-based diet says his fasting insulin is 4. So
Mhm. Yeah, so before the diet, it was like five or something like that originally. And then I did the diet, and then I'm like a little bit skeptical of like the final blood test, because so like the metrics was like hemoglobin A1C was like 5.1, and the blood sugar average was like 100, 102.
mhm.
And then what happened was when I got the blood work, I had like a really late dinner because I had a really long day at work. So I had dinner at like 9 p.m. with like 100 grams, 120 grams of protein. And then the next day I had my blood test at 7 a.m. after driving for like an hour to like the local nearest town. So like looking at the CGM data, just to preface this, whenever I ate carbs with protein at dinner, I saw that there was this elevation in blood sugar for about 12 hours that was like slightly above what I normally would have, right? So like normally I would have a fasting blood sugar of like 85, like 90 a night. And then whenever I had the protein plus sugar at dinner, when usually I would have zero carbs at dinner, or like nearly zero, like a little bit of vegetables. Then my blood sugar with the protein still circulating in my blood, which is known to cause like a little bit of insulin resistance transiently, would be higher. It would be like 95, nearly like 100 all night, right?
Okay.
And that would be about for about like 12 hours. So then whenever I did the blood work, I'm kind of skeptical of the insulin number because it was about 10 hours after I had this 120-gram of protein meal rather than 12, but it went up to about 7, right? So it's still like not pre-diabetic levels, but it did raise like slightly. And I'm just like not super convinced that like if I waited maybe 2 more hours of fasting, then it would have not gone
Probably
down to
it would
5.
drop.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's like, Paul Saladino like says that the number one kind of metric that you want to look for like metabolic health is fasting insulin, where it's like you want like 2 or 3 or something, or even 4. Um, but I think that there's like a lot of other metrics, like there's DHEA to cortisol ratio, there's hemoglobin A1C, there's fasting glucose, average glucose, that are all basically like measuring the same thing, like how well can you um tolerate glucose, and how it's basically like how hungry do your cells get, right? Like having really low fasting insulin and then having your cells be very insulin sensitive means they're ready to accept calories. And um and to me that's like a cellular level like satiety thing. It's like how hungry are you?
No, I'm with you there because I think one of the biggest problems in keto, which people do not discuss, is the opposite from insulin sensitivity, which is insulin suppression. And that's maybe what triggers also excessive gluconeogenesis, very high levels of glucagon, etc. And that creates not a pathological state, maybe something that can turn into a pathological state. I'm not sure. I think I haven't seen many people talk about it or many um, yeah, studies about it, because this is mostly studied in people who have diabetes, etc. And I think that's not the same with people who do keto, but that's it's a bit of a gray zone. But insulin suppression is a real thing. That's the thing that I'm pretty convinced about that. Let's continue on the same path because this is very interesting and all the information you shared, and thanks for your openness and sharing your data as well. Because also someone on Twitter just a couple of days ago posted that sugar causes inflammation. I think you said sugar is good for you, and he said no, it's not, because here's the study. And it was an observational study where they said that it increases the risk for all-cause mortality, etc. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. So I didn't see the study, so I don't know exactly what like the association was or what kind of sugar they were giving. What I
It
do
was
know about
sweet beverages.
sweet
Uh,
beverages, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so like what I do know about the epidemiology is generally that yeah, sugar sweetened beverages are associated with higher all-cause mortality. So like sodas, drinking sodas, people who drink sodas generally die faster. the people who eat fruits or eat candy all live longer as well, right? So it's like there's two explanations here. Like one is there's something magic that is in fruits and candy that makes sugar better. Um, the other explanation is that like people who drink sodas are already unhealthy, right? Like they're not doing healthy habits. And when you look at the actual risk ratios that people have, it's about like 1.2 to 0.8, which means that like kind of at any given point, they'll have like a 20% higher or lower chance of dying than somebody else, which corresponds to not very long. It's like maybe a couple years or like a year or something difference in lifespan. It might be even less than that. So I think when you see these like effects in epidemiology, if the like hazard ratios are only like zero point 0.2 away from the baseline from one, like meaning that the risk change is like 20% higher or lower for all-cause mortality. Um, that's like within the range where it could just be that like somebody is like a little bit healthier, or somebody's like a little bit less healthy, makes better or worse choices. I think a good example of this is and this is like what Paul Saladino talks about, like the risk ratios that you see for people who eat red meat in the US are bad, right? Like you have like maybe 10-20% higher chance of dying in the US if you eat red meat at all, versus somebody who tries to eat like white meat or does healthier habits, is what they say in the US. But it completely flips on its head if you go to Hong Kong, if you go to like these places where red meat is kind of reserved for people who have more wealth generally, where like the poor people eat more of the like white meat. So uh, I like within this range, it's like clearly to me these like socioeconomic factors like more than, and like just healthy user bias more than just the net effect of the actual kind of
Yeah, of
intervention.
course. If it's not a randomized trial,
Mhm.
it's I think it's impossible to do. Then it's very difficult to
Yeah.
draw conclusions.
But there's like a good argument that you want to be in kind of like the lowest risk bin for every metric that you can get, right? So it's like I want to like look at the blood cholesterol, like LDL cholesterol, for example, and I want to be in the lowest risk category of LDL cholesterol, and I want to be in the lowest risk category for triglycerides, and say like sauna makes it so that you live 10 years longer if you are a sauna, like not makes you, right, but say sauna is associated with 10 years of living
Yeah.
longer, you probably like want to do sauna even if it's not like completely causal. And like same thing with like cigarettes, right? Like cigarettes, if you smoke cigarettes, there's like a 7 times increased risk for lung cancer and maybe like 2 or 3 times increased risk for dying at all. Um, like even if it's say there's like some artifact where, oh, everybody who smokes cigarettes also rides a motorcycle and like this can be like mediate the effects. Or say everybody who smokes cigarettes, they smoked this non-organic tobacco and they also had this exposure to pesticides like on the tobacco, or they were exposed to the filters. I mean, like, there's still like the marginal benefit that you would get from the nicotine in the tobacco is like not worth the risk of you being wrong there, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in like this, say organic tobacco, right? So like in terms of like a like decision making framework, I think if you have like a coherent argument where you're like, okay, I think like that fruits are good, sodas are bad, like based on the epidemiology overall, like depending on the sugar source you eat, it kind of averages out to basically nothing. And whenever I eat sugar, this puts me into the lower risk categories of cholesterol. It puts me into the lower risk categories of insulin, puts me into the lower risk categories of triglycerides. Then, then that's like a good argument for adding sugar to your diet, right?
Okay. I I see your argument. Okay. So basically, you're saying that increased good amount of sugar or good type of sugar like fruit probably then acts as a lever for other matrices and overall creates a positive effect. Okay.
Yeah, I think it can, but it could even work with sodas, right? Like you could even do just like drink sodas and then say it improves all of your other metrics, and then you like find that out. Well, then you're probably not going to be the ones who are kind of the unhealthy users who also already have bad, cholesterol and bad other, factors. Um, so
So what we touched upon the, let's say, metabolically compromised people, that maybe that's a big part of the population. So Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for those particular people who
Mhm.
might now listen to this chat we're having and they want to start the honey diet? So should they
Right.
start with a pound of honey or they start slowly?
Yeah, I would say start slowly. I think that so keto and low-fat diets are often studied like side by side in these like in big kind of randomized controlled trials. I mean, you can't really blind them or anything, but anyway, like the low-fat diet and kind of like keto seem to have similar efficacy in weight loss and like blood biomarker improvements in people who are already diabetic and already um metabolically compromised. And this is kind of just like a really extreme, on almost like low fat
Mhm.
diet where you are abusing this like sugar, like liver targeting mechanism. But I think it could be a little bit like more tenuous than just like a low fat diet because we're specifically like ramming the liver with like a lot of calories. And if you already have a lot of like fat in your liver, then you don't get the luxury of doing the diet because say you already have like a lot of fat in your liver all the time, right? And the diet is basically meant to have specifically these calories, right? Really high sugar. And
Mhm.
that's what the liver is supposed to see. But now you have the liver leaking constantly from its internal fat stores these other macros of fat. Like say you ate a bunch of seed oils and now you have fat from seed oil stored in your liver. Well, then what you're essentially doing is eating a diet, whether you like it or not, of both sugar and seed oils, and then that's a different diet, right? Right. So I would say start slowly. I think the primary thing that people who are like diabetic or metabolically compromised, like high fasting insulin, pre-diabetic, or obese should try and do is like by any means try and lower your visceral fat, right? That's like the primary thing that you could do. And then if once you do that, then you can basically do any of these trendy diets, and I think it'll work with a high probability. There are some genetic polymorphisms where even somebody who has like low liver fat, if they don't have the best or like say better versions of FGF21, like there's some worse versions of this hormone that have mutations uh, where the diet just like won't work. But like for most people, once you get rid of the visceral fat, then you can ram like 3,000, 4,000 calories. But yeah, to be short with this, I think that the answer is less calories total. You can still do the kind of honey diet, but you have to like limit calories if you have a lot of visceral fat.
Yeah. Okay, good suggestion. But still, you would start with honey, right? So you wouldn't start with lower glycemic fruit like, I don't know, berries or whatsoever. Okay.
Yeah, I think honey would work.
And actually, now that you mentioned the FGF21, I saw in one of your posts in the study that you cited, and actually, where you said that even high fat or high carb diets will trigger FGF21.
Mhm.
But they also showed in the same or mentioned in the same study that some people did not react very well because they were not able to trigger the same increase uh, following the same diet. And they suggested in the study that actually that should be a marker for how do they call it, a thrifty
Yeah,
metabolism.
the thrifty metabolic phenotype. Yeah, yeah,
Um, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, I
yeah.
guess not one that not everyone is fit for or will not get the benefits basically of the diet. And maybe that's also indeed a marker that people should check. I mean, or try, or as an outcome of the diet, I would never figure it out that they don't lose even in low protein diets.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I think like the whole like thrifty metabolic phenotype hypothesis is generally that if you have some metabolic trauma in earlier life, or even your mother has metabolic trauma, or like say is like poisoned by something, has like a lower metabolic rate, has like a really bad diet, and becomes fat, then you'll get this thrifty metabolic phenotype where your metabolism is like slowed down and you become much more like fat with the same amount of calories or same quality of diet as somebody else who doesn't have this phenotype. And that seems to be like somewhat true. And the blunted FGF21 response could be like a big mediating factor of that. But I think like the people with the thrifty metabolic phenotype also do worse on every diet, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's like worth trying to see if it moves the lever. And I've seen people who on every other diet just like completely fail. But then with a low protein specifically diet, then they do better. I think for those people, what I would do is I would do a lower protein dinner overall, right? So in the honey diet, I formulated it to be throughout the day, uh, you eat a ton of sugar with no protein, and then the sugar, if you wear a CGM, burns off in only a few hours in a protein deficient setting. And then once you eat protein and fat, these things kind of live in your blood for like 12 hours even, right? The protein and fats do. Um, so and I haven't tested this with MCTs. Like MCTs might clear faster without protein, but the general idea was that you could put this 12-hour window where you're kind of inhibited from burning as much sugar as you could. FGF21 is inhibited at night because you sleep through most of it, and then have this 12 hours block where you don't eat any sugar, and then add all the sugar during the day. Um, but I wanted to still have a high protein meal because it's been studied in people who have chronic kidney disease, where a low protein diet is therapeutic. Where say these chronic kidney disease patients will be put on a very low protein diet, like 40, 30 grams of protein in a day, and their kidney health will improve because the protein is hard on the kidneys. And despite their kidney health improving, their all-cause mortality went up. So that tells me that a very low protein diet isn't really great for lifespan. It's like maybe not great for overall health. Like maybe you get other issues like immunosenescence, et cetera, that come from a low protein diet, even though the kidney health improves. So I wanted to find like the balance here where I was like, where can I abuse this metabolic rate increase that happens when you have low protein, but still get enough protein to not have like a shorter lifespan? And also, and one more thing, the people with like diabetes and obesity, a lot of them have really elevated, even fasting amino acids in their blood,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they don't even have the choice of doing a low protein diet, even if they eat low protein while they're obese, because there's a constant high level of amino acids in their blood. So I think it would behave differently in the population that has like this chronically elevated fasting amino acids, um, essentially like the mortality curve.
Yeah. Actually, that was my next question because I mean Brad Marshall, I think maybe brought up the topic a couple of years back because he implemented this very similar diet to you, but in any case with starch, but with low branched chain amino acids. And
Mhm.
he was talking also about the inclusion of glycine because it acts as a cleaner of the mitochondria and helps basically clean up unburned fuel. But is this, I find this as a transient point, right? Transient in the sense that we need the protein, it's just we cannot utilize protein in a proper way if it's already built up and stuck in our cells and our mitochondria, right? So I think the idea so you kind of hacked your way through it
Mhm.
in a way, but generally speaking, so what's your take on protein? So do we need so 1 gram per kilo of body weight, or we want 2 grams of per kilo of body weight? What's the actual
Mhm.
need? I mean, there are so many influencers that talk about protein and protein and protein, right?
Yeah, so I've done a video on this on my YouTube, and I'm gonna start putting out more kind of just generally audio content, like on my YouTube pretty soon here. But I kind of got swept up into work and got really busy after I made that one video. So I only have one video on YouTube, but it is on this topic specifically about like
Okay.
how much protein do you need for like lifespan and for lean mass outcomes generally. And it generally it seems that like once you get above like 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo, there's like no additional benefit for lean mass for having muscle. So even like 1 gram per kilo to 1.2 seems to be like around where is best. So but for like a 70 kilo male, that's like only 70 grams of protein. That's like less than a pound of beef. It's like really not too bad to get from my experience. But yeah, like the bodybuilders online and everybody who promotes this in the fitness industry ends up saying like 1 gram per pound, which is insane, right? That's like a
Yeah,
lot. That's like 180 grams, 200 grams of protein, depending on
yeah,
or
that's
like it could be like a lot. So I And I think like once you get to that level, then you run into the issues of like, okay, are you with chronic activation of mTOR, are you increasing cancer risk? Like, are you increasing kidney disease risk, et cetera? There are negatives to having like a high amount of protein, besides the fact that people who eat that much protein just like feel tired all the time. They like don't feel great.
Yeah, I think it's a big trade-off because also in Greece, and not only in Greece, but the diets
Mhm,
with high protein are very popular. So basically, chicken and salad, chicken and
mhm,
salad, chicken and salad, and that's I think it has a big cost because one is mTOR activation, and the other one, yes, it triggers satiety, so you eat less, and that's actually in our discussion not a positive thing; it's a negative thing, and I'm not sure why people are or promoting such numbers, but what we recommend in our keto box is 20% of calories and
mhm,
around 1 gram per
mhm.
kilo. So
Yeah, that sounds right.
okay, so let's move on to the last section, which is the keto section.
Mhm,
So, yeah, I would like to basically just discuss how we can maybe, or what learnings we can take
mhm,
from a completely different diet and
mhm,
actually see if there's some things that we can incorporate into our lifestyle, into a keto setting.
mhm.
But before we do that, so what's your opinion of keto, or have you tried out keto before, or what are your thoughts on that?
Because so my main kind of touch point with keto, I don't think I did it very well. Because what I did was carnivore originally, and carnivore, and you know, I did try to eat like fattier cuts of meat, but with carnivore, you're eating so much protein that I think it can really mess things up. Where I was eating, you know, multiple 100 grams of protein a day, and it was like getting to like 40+% of my calories, probably, or like 30 to 40%. So I think that one of the things with keto that you know people on carnivore do wrong is like eat so much protein. Like if you look at Sean Baker with his blood glucose, like he has his gluconeogenesis is like so ramped up where he'll have like a pre-diabetic like fasting glucose sometimes, like or you know his like insulin or and blood lipid markers just like aren't great at all. Um, but a lot of other people on keto experience like really good like blood markers, like pretty low insulin, pretty low fasting glucose. But I think that the people who do generally better on keto have quite a high fat diet rather than like high protein. Kind of like you said, you recommend like 1 gram per kilo
Yeah.
because you can do a zero carb diet that isn't keto because you ate too much protein. So, but another access to this that I think is like not explored nearly as much is uh, it's something from the hyperlipid blog. If you're familiar, there's this guy Peter who, and I can't attempt to pronounce his last name, but he writes this hyperlipid blog where he had this hypothesis called the protons hypothesis. And generally, the idea here is that uh, cells have this thing inside of them called reactive oxygen species. It's basically these oxygens that can have these extra electrons on them sometimes and react with everything around them. And generally, people think that these are very damaging, but there's more evidence that has come out over time that these reactive oxygen species aren't just a byproduct and aren't just damaged, but they're actually signaling molecules and very important signaling molecules. So Peter's hypothesis is that these reactive oxygen species are a primitive signal of satiety because they rise whenever calories are processed very quickly, essentially. And then he looked at the different types of fats, and he found that certain fats produce more reactive oxygen species and certain fats produce less. And the ones that produce more are these longer chain saturated fats, and the ones that produce less are the polyunsaturated fats and the MCT oils as well. So then the thing that he kind of explored here was he thought that it was best to induce as much satiety as you can, essentially, right? So induce as much reactive oxygen species, make the cells insulin resistant, and that's what it would do if you had long chain saturated fats, which are the stearic acid. It's the fats that you find in tallow mainly, or cocoa butter. And then the cells, specifically fat cells that have the highest exposure to fat, would reject calories and then they would shrink, right? So you would stay skinny. So that's one axis. I think that's like one potential diet people could do is if you want the satiety, if you want to like just have your fat cells reject calories as much as they can and cause insulin resistance, but in this healthier way, then you could just have tallow as your main fat source and or cocoa butter as well, like some chocolate, but maybe like the artificially sweetened chocolate if you're doing keto. Um, and and then be able to reject calories and be satiated all the time. But if you there's with like the honey diet, there's kind of an alternative approach to this. So the alternative approach is go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and maximize the insulin sensitivity. So minimize the reactive oxygen species and make the cells as hungry as you possibly can. But you do this in a way where they also can process all the calories and process them much faster. And that's like through this hormonal mediator, FGF21, which induces this change. So then the way that this happens in keto is the opposite end of the long chain fats is the MCT oils mainly, where it directly goes into the liver, like bypasses insulin, doesn't even go through like the lymphatic system, just like directly goes into the liver, and then leaks to the rest of the body a little bit. Um, and then insulin like kind of sensitizes all the cells to insulin. So then under Peter's idea here, like this would be kind of inducing of obesity. Like having a little bit of MCT oil could make this fat cells put on calories much more easily. Um, but I think the other axis here that gets added to it with the honey diet is that there's this FGF21 response, which prevents that from happening. It raises the metabolism everywhere. So there's these two axes where on keto, you could still do a keto diet and not lose weight or not gain weight, in my opinion. It would be very high MCT, very low protein, or you could do very high stearic acid, long chain saturated fat like tallow. So MCT would be like coconut oil, but like even fractionated coconut oil, like pure MCT oil would be the best. And then the long chain saturated fat would be like cocoa butter, beef tallow. And then if you do that, if you do the tallow cocoa butter, you just eat even protein with it, but you would eat less overall. And then with the MCT, you would eat a lot more. And as long as you eat no protein, then you don't gain weight. And then I think that everything in between that causes some weight gain, right? So like the worst way to do keto would be to eat a fat that's kind of in between these two. So like a say monounsaturated fat or like a longer chain polyunsaturated fat. So linoleic acid, oleic acid, and then eat a lot of protein. Uh, and then that would give you the worst of both worlds, right? Where you're still hungry, but your cells are still accepting calories and you don't have a metabolic rate increase. So then you just start your fat cells start to grow. That's that's kind of my opinion there, right? So I think olive oil like might not be the best, but I think you know it can work in maybe really low protein contexts, but it would be hard to make it work as well as like a pure stearic acid diet or a pure MCT diet. Uh,
Okay, got you. So the red lines, first of all, and I'm pretty sure we agree on that, is linoleic acid, so
mhm,
polyunsaturated. So would you go as far? I mean, okay, you don't include them at all in your diet, so maybe you don't have an opinion, or maybe you do, but nuts, seeds, like sunflower seeds or walnuts, all these are off the table as well. Because in keto, we're not proposing them actually.
mhm,
We don't have them in our list. But I mean, many people do keto with this
mhm.
and tahini and so forth, right? And peanut butter and whatsoever. So I think that that's off the list, right?
Yeah, I would say it's off the list. I mean, and I'm not claiming that it will work for nobody. Like I think some people could do this one, like those diets and keto. There's like many mechanisms at play here. Like a completely mixed macro diet, high protein, high carb, high fat is like going to make most people gain weight, right?
Yeah.
These days, if it's especially if it's like low quality foods, and then but some people can totally eat that diet and be fine, right? And then keto diet for most people is going to work, but some people keto just doesn't work for super metabolically compromised people, and then they have to explore the more extreme versions of keto that are like low protein keto or only saturated fat keto, right? So it's like I think when we're talking about this here, it's like a spectrum of like, um, you know, the forbidden things, completely forbidden things. Maybe the people who are the most metabolically compromised like should not eat those. And I would agree with like if you're super super metabolically compromised, drop the walnuts, drop the seeds, even like a little bit of even the Brazil nuts, like the selenium, isn't
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be worth the polyunsaturated fats in them. So
Yeah. So, do you think there is a population that can live in the swamp? So, somewhere in the middle. So, is it only athletes? Is it only young people? I don't know who can live in the swamp.
the people I'm jealous of, I don't know. Like, yeah, there's definitely these people. Like, I don't know. There's some people who can just eat whatever and somehow are skinny. I don't know what's special about them, but I wish I was them. Maybe they were just never poisoned. Like, you know, I was able to eat like a much more mixed macro diet, and then there was one summer where I ate just like a ton of KFC before I was into health, and I started getting all these migraines, and I just became super like unhealthy and in pain all the time just from eating like these probably degraded fryer oil for a summer. And since then, any diet that I do is like much harder to do. So like that's kind of like the thrifty metabolic phenotype hypothesis, right? Like
Yeah.
if you have this metabolic trauma, if you have this kind of really bad time where you have like a poison to your metabolism, then for the rest of your life, even after you've removed the poison, then you're going to be somewhat compromised. Um, it's hard. Like I think that there's like some truth to that. I think you can reverse most of it, but I think that there is like some truth to it.
Yeah, I think for me, what I find is that age plays an important role.
Mhm.
So, a lot of people could get away with a lot of mistakes as they were younger, and
Mhm.
the door closes pretty fast when you're going into your 30s, 40s, 50s. So I think that's the have as good as a base as you can find in order to have more wiggling room. Because
Mhm.
also I'm not, I mean, some people find great comfort and sustainability with carnivore,
Mhm.
but I think doesn't leave you much wiggling room if it doesn't work, right? So what can you do more, right? So can you cut more carbs? You don't have any.
Well,
So
there's an interesting carnivore diet I saw. It's like this guy Carnivore Augustus basically does this, and a few others do as well these days, where they do basically like 70+% or maybe 80% of their calories, maybe even more, from deodorized beef tallow. Like they'll literally just melt it and drink it, uh, as far as I understand, or maybe season it a little bit. Uh, and then and then they do so they do a low protein carnivore diet because all of their calories are from the beef tallow.
yeah, yeah, that maybe works as well.
But yeah, but like, do you really want to live like that, or do you want a little bit more variety? So that's why I think like the honey diet is generally it's like one of the higher variety extreme diets that exists. Um,
Yeah, that's true. Um, but how can someone in the keto context,
mhm.
you think should can they include some sort of version of a honey diet, or let's call it carb cycling, um, once in a while, and would there be any benefits? If you get into a state, then just switching once a week, for example, probably confuses the system and doesn't add any value. Maybe it's even worse. And maybe the same way even for the honey diet, right? So do you want to do a high fat diet once a month? I'm not sure. What's your opinion in carb cycling or
Yeah.
these type of interventions?
So I think it's like psychologically hard because I mean you're gonna see on the scale when you're gaining the water weight back when you're carb cycling that you're like, oh my God, I'm gaining weight. And then you're gonna be like losing the weight on the keto and you never know if it's like water weight or it's actually fat. So I think like psychologically it just is tough for a lot of people to do that. Just like seeing on the scale and getting afraid. I think it's like a hotly debated topic whether or not cheating on a diet is like okay as well, right? Like some people have argued to me, like Josh Rayner on the last podcast I went on that a lot of people's diets work because they're not strict on it, right? Where they're like, oh, I do this carnivore diet and it's like the best thing ever. I feel great all the time. But then you like hang out with them and they're like actually eating some plants and some salads as well. And then they'll like eat a donut on the weekend. It's like you're not actually doing a carnivore diet. Um, but maybe it works for them because they're like not that strict on it. But then some people who have like maybe more of like a binge purge type personality like can't tolerate even like a little bit of wiggle room because then they'll just keep binging on the things that are problematic. So like I think it's like a deeply personal question whether or not like you can even introduce like carbs back, right? Like some people like on keto just like really have a problem with carbs because like once they start eating honey, then they think, oh, I can also have ice cream. I can also have like all this other stuff. I can have donuts. And then it's like, well, if it's like a gateway to eating these things that are like truly a problem for you, then maybe it's like not worth doing. No, but
I agree.
if it's something, if you can, I think if you can tolerate like psychologically like the big shifts on the scale, and once you eat these fruits and honey again, that you're not going to binge on the things that are truly unhealthy, which to me are like basically foods that are super mixed macro, fat and carbs, and maybe have the bad like linoleic acid, like the seed oils. Uh, as long as you can avoid those still, then I think it would be okay. Like I think that I don't see any like metabolic or like kind of scientific reason why you shouldn't be able to switch back and forth. Um,
Because the people who do it claim that this is because they want to be carb sensitive or insulin sensitive and keep their thyroid status up and this and that, right? So, but carb addiction is a thing, is real. So
mhm.
it's not funny, I think. So maybe if
Yeah.
you're playing with the fire, then you might get burned. That's upon what you said that high protein and high fat late in the evening will cause some sort of potentially hyperglycemia the next morning. So, would we say that one learning from you is that we don't eat, first of all, late, and we don't eat a huge meal? In that case, would be a keto meal late in the evening. So,
Yeah, so it's I mean I think it is better. It's kind of hard to construct this diet perfectly in that respect because I think it is better if you eat a little bit earlier before bed because I mean one of the things people get if you eat like a giant meal before bed is like acid reflux and it can mess with your sleep. Like a lot of people get this.
mhm,
And it's like underrated just the little stomach discomfort you get from like sleeping with a completely full stomach. I don't think it's like too problematic to have the slight elevation in blood sugar overnight. If anything, having like a little bit higher blood sugar can prevent really big like blood sugar drops that some people get during the night that wake them up.
mhm.
So I don't think like the actual metabolic response is problematic. I mainly think it's like a stomach thing that moving the meal earlier helps with. Um, Though, like some people, I think on the honey diet, the way I originally formulated it was basically where you wake up, you eat sugar until 3 p.m., you fast between 3 and 7, and then at 7 p.m. you have your dinner. And then at that time, I was going to bed at like midnight. So I was still having a few hours before going to bed. And then I would encourage people who wake up earlier, say like 5 a.m., to just move everything up by a few hours and still have like a fasting period. Um, but I've also seen people who get rid of the fasting period completely and they still lose weight. And then some people like need that fasting period to lose weight. So theoretically, if you get rid of the fasting period and you can still lose weight, you can move the dinner like much earlier and move it like really far away from bedtime. And then not deal with the bedtime eating issues. And then the fats and protein, once your stomach kind of not metabolizes it, but it's like stomach breaks all the things down, it gets like into your small and like large intestine, then your sleep quality isn't going to be mitigated or messed up by the your stomach being totally full, and you get the benefits of slightly higher blood sugar overnight because you don't get the hypoglycemia that wakes you up. So it's kind of hard to balance it. So I think like to summarize the thought here, the axis, if you're following the honey diet, is that you want to mess with is how far away can I put dinner from sleep? And then how long of a fasting period can I have between eating all of the sugar and then eating a high fat, high protein meal? And I think having like a little bit of a buffer period between sugar and then your high fat, high protein meal is kind of essential because imagine you just have your blood sugar at 150, like a spike, and then you add a bunch of fats and protein in. Well, then you're going to make your cells start to kind of like reject it. You're going to stop the FGF21 response, and then you're not going to have the faster metabolism of the sugar, right? So you do need like a little bit of a window there. But is it 1 hour? Is it 3 hours? I think it's like kind of a personal question there.
What we say always with the keto box is listen to your hunger. So in this
Mhm.
case, we would say, I mean, listen to your hunger, but be a bit hungry, right? So don't
Mhm.
eat just because it's time or whatsoever. Just induce a bit hunger, so which
Yeah.
means that you're ready for your next meal. Okay, I have still one last note, which
Mhm.
was about cortisol and estrogen.
Mhm.
And you also said that in your protocol that your DHA went up.
Mhm.
So maybe since you did also carnivore and you did obviously now for a long time the honey diet. So what are your thoughts when it comes to stress hormones, cortisol, DHEA, and all the rest?
Yeah. So I think the data with, these hormones is pretty robust, where if you have a high DHEA to cortisol ratio, then like basically high steroid hormone to stress hormone ratio, your mortality risk goes down by quite a lot. So it's like a very good predictor of mortality and just overall health. Um, I think that there's like some evidence that you need like a little bit of dietary fat to have like high levels of testosterone and hormones in general. But one thing that carbs does is reduce SHBG and
Mhm.
increases like the free uh, like male hormones or like female hormones. So like I think that the total testosterone that I had on it was like the blood work that I had before the honey diet was on more like a Paul Saladino type diet where it was kind of high fat, high carb, high protein, and I had a little bit higher weight, but it was animal based kind of in general where it was the clean foods. It was like beef, it was fruits, like a little bit of honey, but not much. And on that diet, I had maybe like an 850 total testosterone, and then it dropped to maybe 800 or like 750
Mhm.
on the honey diet. But my free testosterone went up. So because
Okay.
the SHBG went down, right? So then overall, like I think it was like a more kind of uh like lower stress, more androgenic like blood panel from what I understood. And DHEA was a marker that I had a hard time going up or like rising on the Paul Saladino type animal-based diet. And I was happy to see that that increased. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what insights I can really give you on that, but
No, that's
everybody says
I
different.
mean, it for me it opens up a quite a big discussion because
Mhm,
if there is a a problem with keto diets is, in my opinion, and I've seen it actually many times in blood panels, that they result in a stressful environment
mhm,
for and I think cortisol DHA is an important ratio that people need to monitor. So
mhm,
if you don't see a problem in the in that ratio, then what you're doing is probably okay. You are adapting in a
mhm.
proper way. But if you see the ratio going in the wrong direction, I guess probably some carbs could be the solution to the
Yeah.
problem.
Or just lower protein and higher fat, right? Like so I've seen people, just increase the amount of calories that they have, and then it works for their weight if they reduce the protein. And then they get better blood biomarkers. Like X fat loss on Twitter, he does the heavy cream diet a lot of the
Mhm.
time where he'll have like 4,000 5,000 calories total in a day of mostly of heavy cream with like a very low protein, like only 50 grams of protein or less. Uh, sometimes yeah, sometimes much less than that. And his like thyroid markers are perfect. He has like super low TSH, very high T3, T4, free T3, T4. His testosterone is like through the roof. But I only see keto markers like that when they do like a pretty high calorie diet, right? Like eating more
Exactly.
seems to be better.
That's what I would say. So I think the common in everything we're talking about is high calorie diet.
Mhm.
If you're starting reducing calories, then probably you see these states of stress hormones, etc. So maybe I didn't say it properly, but yeah, first you need to ensure that you're getting the calories your body needs.
Well, and this goes back to like the lifespan versus metabolic rate argument, right? Like if we see in just everybody who increases their amount of calorie intake without gaining weight, well, their metabolic rate is increasing, and then their blood biomarkers all get much better and put them in the lower risk categories. Well, then do we really expect that eating more is going to be worse for their lifespan? Like probably not, right? And it hasn't really been studied in humans, like whether like the actual metric of like eating more of a good quality diet is that actually bad for humans? It's never been studied from what I understand. So like I think with our best proxies, which is the blood markers, which is what insurance companies use to underwrite their lifespan risk when they look at life giving people life insurance, it looks like eating higher calories generally kind of helps people like live longer, is what I would think.
Let's maybe let's wrap up here because I think that's a we circled back to the start of
Mhm.
metabolism and high calorie diets. I think that's a nice way to close. what are your next steps? What are your next thoughts here? What is the f future holding for you? Maybe you can share
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, so I'm definitely gonna try a mixed macro fat and carb, but low protein kind of formulation of the honey diet soon that I think could work. So agave nectar is a it's like a like liquid essentially that you can get from agave that is very, very high in fructose. It's like 80% fructose, 20% glucose, whereas like sucrose is 50-50, honey is 50-50, glucose to fructose. Um, so then an MCT also is something that targets the liver most like very directly, kind of like fructose. So theoretically, if all of this is like through FGF21 and it's like low protein, like mediated, then I could just drink MCT oil and use agave syrup, and that should be like the strongest possible inducer of FGF21, like if this is the correct mechanism, and it should make me lose weight, just like replacing the honey phase with that. So I'm gonna try a diet and like pretty soon where I do basically MCT mayo, where I do like an egg yolk because there's egg lecithin in it that can help export the fats from the liver if the liver is overwhelmed. Um, so egg yolk, maybe one egg yolk, a bunch of MCT oil, make a bunch of MCT mayo, and then I'm gonna try agave nectar in my coffee, and I'm gonna see if that helps. I think it's a very extreme diet, and if you're metabolically compromised, like don't do this. This is probably like if you wanted to induce fatty liver in somebody, you would do this plus protein. But my bet is that low protein will protect from fatty liver, which is like the opposite of what everybody says. So I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna publish my results. I wouldn't, or not publish, but post, right? And but that's what to look out for if you're gonna follow me on Twitter after this at Anabology. And yeah, I don't know if it's gonna work or not, but stay tuned. So
Well, you did a good job with the honey diet, so I think probably it might have some good success. But where can people find you besides Twitter, I guess?
yeah, so
Or
mostly Twitter right now. It's at Anabology, and I've a website anabology.com that has some other links. I have a website called Longest Levers that has the protocols like the honey diet on there. Um, Yeah, and I have a site called literature.bio if you're just generally interested in science. It's a place where I store some scientific texts.
okay.
Cool.
Okay, well, it was great chatting with you. I think I really enjoyed it.
Mhm.
A different perspective, and we stay in touch.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah, great chat. Thank you.
Have a great day.